The glass beside me hums softly as the train moves, its rhythm folding into the steady beat of my heart. Outside, the world drifts past in watercolor, fields blurring into houses, houses melting into trees. It feels strange, this movement after so many still years. For 12 winters I waited. And now, with every mile, I am being carried towards something I once thought I'd lost forever. I watch my reflection fade in and out of the window. Sometimes I see myself as I am now, older, quieter, with a face that's learned how to live inside silence. Other times I see him, a small boy, his nose pressed to the same kind of glass, pointing at cows in the fields, his laughter filling the space between us. The years bend for a moment, like light on water, and for just that breath of time, we are both there. It's been 12 years since I last saw my son. 12 birthdays I missed. 12 winters without his voice in the house. I used to count the years like wounds. Now they just sit quietly, like old scars that no longer ache but never fade. The train slows near a station I don't know. A woman waves at someone waiting. A man in a red scarf takes her hand. I watch the small reunion, the ease of it, the simple grace of touch. And I wonder what it feels like to come home without hesitation. In my bag, there's an old photograph folded so many times that the corners have begun to soften. It's of him, maybe 8 years old, a tooth missing, sunlight tangled in his hair. He's wearing the watch I gave him, the same one I carry now. Its glass cracked but still ticking, steady and stubborn. I wind it sometimes even though I don't wear it. I suppose it's my way of keeping him moving, even from a distance. It's strange how time can stop in some places and rush ahead in others. The clock in my kitchen never seemed to move during those years of waiting, but the seasons outside never stopped changing. Summer came and went, winter settled again. The trees kept shedding and growing back, while I stayed where I was, afraid to reach out, afraid of what I might hear if I did. Sometimes silence becomes a kind of home. You learn to move carefully inside it, not to disturb what's settled. I told myself that one day he'd come looking for me, that maybe love knows its way back, even after years of quiet. But deep down I think I was afraid, because what if it didn't? The world outside begins to glow with late afternoon light, the kind that softens everything it touches. Shadows stretch across the fields like memory itself, long, quiet, and almost beautiful. I imagine him somewhere under that same sky, unaware that I'm coming. I don't know what I'll say when I see him. Do you greet a grown man with the same tenderness you once saved for a child? Do you ask for forgiveness? Or do you just sit beside him and let the silence do the talking? Maybe forgiveness isn't spoken at all. Maybe it's something that happens in the way a heart begins to loosen, quietly, like a door opening without sound. The train hums on, and I close my eyes. I can still remember the weight of his small hand in mine, the way he'd squeezed twice. Our little code for I love you. I wonder if he remembers that. I wonder if he ever tried it on someone else, the way children carry pieces of us without realizing. There's a rhythm to travel, the way it lulls you into thought, the way it lets memories find their place. I think about the last day I saw him, the space that grew between us like a shadow too long to cross. I used to replay that day in my mind, trying to change it, to find the words I should have said, but time doesn't edit. It only layers. One quiet regret over another until you can barely tell where it all began. Still, beneath the fear, something small stirs, a trembling kind of hope. The kind that doesn't dare to name itself yet. Hope has its own silence too, a softer one. The ticket crinkles in my coat pocket. My stop is coming soon. I look once more through the window, the reflection of the sky now deepening into evening. There's a stillness in that fading light, a kind of peace I haven't known in years. Maybe it's just the calm before the heart remembers how to break again, or maybe it's something else entirely. The train begins to slow, the brakes singing their tired tune. I hold the watch in my hand, the one that never stopped ticking, even when everything else did. I think about how it survived the years, how it kept time faithfully, even when I couldn't. Maybe that's what love does. It keeps time for us, waiting until we're ready to catch up. Outside the window, I see the platform coming into view. People stepping forward, others stepping away. Life, as always, moving on without permission. I take a deep breath, feeling the weight of the years settle and lift all at once. 12 years, and yet it feels like only a moment ago that I was waiting by another window, watching him walk to school with his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. He never looked back that day. I told myself he was growing independent. Maybe he was already learning how to leave. Now it's my turn to take a step forward. The train sighs to a stop. The doors open with a soft chime. I rise slowly, clutching the old photograph, the cracked watch, and something fragile I barely recognize. The courage to face what time has left behind. As I step onto the platform, the cold air meets me like an old truth, sharp, honest, unkind, but real. Somewhere beyond the crowd, beyond the years, my son is out there. Maybe waiting, maybe not. Either way, the world feels smaller now, and for the first time in 12 years, I'm moving toward it. Morning light used to spill through the kitchen window in long golden stripes, touching everything like memory already in progress. The house had its own rhythm back then. Soft footsteps, quiet laughter, the clatter of a spoon against a bowl. Even the walls seemed to breathe with us, as if the air itself knew our names. He was small enough then that his laughter could fill a room. Small enough that his hand still reached for mine without thinking. There were muddy shoes by the door, half-read storybooks under the couch, crayons scattered like confetti from another life. Every corner of that house carried a trace of him. The faint scent of soap after bath time, the warmth of a pillow he'd fallen asleep on mid-story. Evening was always my favorite time. That was when the house would settle into quiet comfort. A single lamp glowing, the hum of the fridge, the sound of pages turning. I would read to him until his eyelids drooped, his thumb resting near his mouth, his breathing steady. Some nights, when the words in the book ran out, I'd keep speaking anyway, just to keep the sound of my voice near him a little longer. He had this habit. Before he fell asleep, he'd squeeze my finger twice. Our small, secret way of saying I love you. I can still feel it, that little pulse of trust, even after all these years. It's strange what the body remembers long after the heart forgets how to speak. Back then, everything felt infinite. The future was just a place waiting for us to arrive. We built forts out of blankets, chased fireflies in the yard, made promises that neither of us understood but both believed in. I told him that love meant always being there. He nodded like children do, certain that the world was as simple as a bedtime story. But time has a way of sneaking in quietly. It doesn't arrive as thunder, just small moments like missed dinners, words said too quickly, a door closing before an apology can reach it. Looking back, I can see how it began, not in one argument, not in one mistake, but in the slow drift between two people who stopped seeing how much they mattered to each other. The house noticed first. There were mornings when breakfast stayed uneaten, nights when the light in the hallway stayed on because I never came to turn it off. His laughter grew less certain, his questions sharper, his silences longer. I told myself he was just growing up, that children change. But deep down, I knew he was learning something from me, how to stay quiet when it hurts. I remember one afternoon in particular. It was raining, the kind that turns the world silver and still. He was drawing by the window, his head bent, the pencil smudging across the paper. I asked what he was making. He said, "It's us." I looked closer, two stick figures standing apart, a blue line of rain between them. I laughed softly and said, "You forgot the umbrella." He just looked up and said, "We didn't bring one." I didn't know how to answer that. The days that followed were filled with small absences. I worked later, spoke less. He stopped asking when I'd be home. The space between our words widened until it felt like standing on opposite sides of an ocean. I wanted to reach out, to pull him back into the warmth of those early mornings. But I didn't know how to cross what I'd built. Pride is quiet like that. It doesn't shout, it waits. And by the time you notice it, it's already standing between you and everything you love. Still, there were moments, brief, fragile, when it felt like nothing had changed. When I'd find one of his drawings tucked into a book, or hear him humming in the shower, or smell the soap that meant bedtime was near. Those were the moments that reminded me that love doesn't just vanish. It lingers, patient and watchful, even when we stop tending to it. The house itself held on. The walls still carried his height marks in pencil, each line a record of time we once shared. The swing in the yard still creaked under the wind, as if waiting for someone to come back. The old watch I'd given him still sat on the nightstand beside his bed, ticking softly, counting time even as everything else stood still. I used to sit by his door some nights, just to listen. Sometimes I thought I heard him whispering in his sleep. Other times just the soft sound of him breathing. I wanted to open the door, to tell him I was sorry. Not for anything specific, just for how everything was changing. But I didn't. Maybe I thought there'd be time later. Maybe I thought love could survive without being spoken. If I close my eyes now, I can still see the sunlight in that house, the way it used to catch in the dust, turning ordinary air into something almost sacred. That house was more than walls and rooms. It was a memory learning to breathe, a photograph that never quite faded. Before the silence, before the distance, before pride took its place at the table, there was laughter. There was warmth. There was a small boy who believed that home meant forever, and there was me, someone who didn't yet understand that love, if left waiting too long, learns to walk away quietly. It didn't happen with shouting. There were no broken plates, no slammed doors. Just quiet, the kind that feels too heavy for an ordinary day. The kind that makes you realize only later that something irreversible has already begun. It was late afternoon. The rain had stopped, leaving the sky gray and swollen. He was by the window again, tracing lines in the condensation with his fingertip. I remember the faint squeak of his sweater when he turned, the way his face looked older than it should have. I said something small, something that felt safe. "Dinner's getting cold." He didn't answer at first. Just nodded, barely, and went back to his drawing. It was always that way toward the end. Words landing softly, then vanishing before they reached him. There are moments you look back on and realize they were the last of something. The last time his backpack sat by the door. The last time I heard his laughter from another room. The last time I called his name and he still turned around. But you never know that in the moment. You only know the ordinariness of it, and how it suddenly felt different, like a song losing its melody. That evening, the house was too still. Even the clock seemed hesitant to tick. I found myself standing in the hallway, hand hovering near his door. On the other side, I could hear him moving, slow, quiet, deliberate. The sound of drawers opening, clothes folded, not in anger, not in haste, just leaving. When he stepped into the hall, he looked right past me, not with hate. That would have been easier. Hate means you still care enough to burn. His eyes held something else. Resignation. Distance. A silence that had learned how to breathe on its own. He said, "I think I should stay with Mom for a while." His voice didn't tremble. Mine did. I wanted to say, "Stay," or "We can fix this," or even, "Don't go." But the words caught in my throat like they'd been waiting too long to matter. So I just nodded. A simple, cowardly nod. He picked up his bag, walked toward the door. The sound of the zipper closing still lives in my head, crisp, final, indifferent. When he opened the door, the air rushed in, cold and damp, carrying the smell of rain and pavement. He stood there a moment, one foot outside, the other still inside the warmth of the home we'd built. I waited for him to look back, to give me some sign, even a small one, that he wanted me to stop him. He didn't. And then, just like that, he was gone. No dramatic goodbye, no last words, only the faint click of the door settling into its frame. It's strange, the way silence can echo. For weeks after, I'd hear that sound, the door closing, again and again. It became my memory's metronome, keeping time with everything I'd lost. That night, I walked through the rooms as if they might still hold him. His cup was still by the sink, his shoes by the door, his blanket folded at the end of his bed. The air still smelled faintly of his shampoo, that clean, innocent scent that made him feel so near. I sat on his bed and held the blanket to my chest, and for the first time I realized that love can be heavy. It can weigh so much when there's no one left to give it to. Days turned into weeks. I told myself it was temporary. that he just needed space. But time has a way of proving what we're too afraid to admit. Messages went unanswered. Holidays passed quietly. The sound of laughter never came back to fill the rooms. The house began to change. Not all at once, slowly, almost mercifully. The swing outside rusted. The marks on the wall faded under a fresh coat of paint. Even the echo of his voice softened, until it became something my memory had to strain to recall. But the silence, that stayed. It grew roots. I learned to live around it, the way you learn to live with an old wound. Most days it didn't hurt. It just ached, quietly, insistently, like the ticking of a watch you can't stop hearing once you've noticed it. For years, that moment replayed in my mind. The way he stood at the door, the way he didn't look back, and me, frozen, waiting for a second chance that never came. If I could step back into that moment now, I wouldn't beg him to stay. I'd just tell him I loved him. Not in the way that tries to fix things, but in the way that asks for nothing in return. But back then, I didn't understand how silence becomes its own kind of goodbye. And by the time I did, the door had already closed. It came on an evening so ordinary, I almost missed it. The kind of evening when the world feels distant, when the clock ticks louder than the house itself, and the shadows stretch long enough to touch memory. I was washing a mug that hadn't been used in days when my phone buzzed on the counter. A single message. I'll be in town next week. Maybe we can meet. No greeting, no signature, just that. And yet, I knew exactly who it was. For a moment, I didn't move. My hand stayed under the running water, the warmth fading until it turned cold. The sound of it, steady, endless, filled the space between those words. Maybe we can meet. It's strange how hope can feel both light and heavy at once. Like something you've longed for but don't know how to hold anymore. I read the message again, tracing the words as if touching them might make them real. After 12 years of silence, this small, cautious line was how it broke. I didn't reply right away. I didn't know how to. What do you say after all that time? I've missed you? I'm sorry? Thank you. Every sentence felt too fragile, too easily misunderstood. Instead, I sat by the window, the same one I'd watched from for years, and let memory wash over me. The streetlights flickered on, one by one, as if the world itself was remembering with me. I thought of him at 12, sitting cross-legged on the rug, building towers from blocks he never wanted to finish, because finishing meant it was over. And then I thought of him now, grown, independent, living a life that had no room for me. That night I didn't sleep. I kept imagining the sound of his voice. Was it deeper, warmer, distant? Did it still carry that soft break when he tried not to cry? I remembered the last time I'd heard it, the day the door closed, and wondered if I'd ever forgotten it, or if I'd simply buried it deep enough not to ache. The next morning, I packed a small bag. Not because I was sure I'd go, but because I needed to believe I still could. The road between us had grown long, lined with years of things left unsaid. But somewhere beneath the fear there was a pull, quiet, persistent, almost like forgiveness trying to find its way back home. The drive to the town felt like stepping through old photographs. Every turn was familiar, but faintly altered, the way memories blur around the edges when you hold them too tightly. The old gas station was still there, though its sign had faded. The oak tree at the corner still stood tall, roots spread deep into the same soil where we once buried a tin box filled with his childhood secrets. With every mile, I rehearsed what I might say. I'm proud of you. I never stopped thinking about you. I wish I'd been better at loving you. But words felt useless compared to silence, the same silence that had defined our years apart. It wasn't just what separated us, it was what we'd both learned to live inside of. When I finally arrived at the cafe he'd chosen, I sat in the car for a long time before stepping out. My hands shook, not with fear exactly, but with the fragile weight of what this moment meant. Inside, the world moved gently around me. Cups clinking, quiet conversations, the smell of roasted coffee and rain-soaked coats. I scanned the room, heart pounding with recognition I hadn't yet earned. And then, There he was, older, taller. The boy I remembered, hidden behind a man I didn't quite know. His face was calm, unreadable, and yet the eyes, those were the same. Familiar and distant all at once, the kind of eyes that remember, even when they wish they didn't. He looked up. Our eyes met. Time stopped pretending to move forward. For a second I thought I saw something soften in him. Maybe surprise, maybe something gentler. But then it passed, replaced by that careful restraint people use when they've practiced not to need you anymore. I smiled, unsure if I should wave. He didn't move, just nodded toward the empty seat across from him. I walked over, the sound of my footsteps far too loud for the space between us. When I sat down, the world shrank to a hum. The clatter of cups faded, the chatter dissolved. There was only him, and the ocean of everything that had gone unsaid. He spoke first. "How have you been?" Ordinary words, but they held years inside them. "I've been okay," I said, though my voice barely reached the table. We talked about small things, the weather, work, the town, the kind of conversation strangers have when they're trying not to touch something fragile. I noticed the way he stirred his coffee without drinking it, the way his fingers tapped the cup, restless and restrained. Every time he looked away, I studied his face. The faint scar near his eyebrow, the same one from when he fell off his bike as a child. It felt strange to see it on a grown man, strange to see him wearing time I hadn't shared. I wanted to reach across the table, to bridge the years with one small gesture. But my hand stayed still. Some distances aren't measured in miles. They're measured in fear. When he finally said, "I should get going soon," I felt the air leave the room. I nodded, even as every part of me begged for just one more minute. He stood, left a few bills on the table, and said softly, "Take care." That was it. 2 words, a lifetime undone in their quietness. When he walked out, I didn't call after him. I just sat there, staring at the cup between my hands. The steam had long vanished. The coffee was cold. I thought forgiveness would sound different. Warmer, maybe, or final. But it turns out forgiveness doesn't always speak. Sometimes it just leaves you with silence that doesn't hurt as much as it used to. As I left the cafe, rain began to fall again, soft, unhurried. I stood there for a while, letting it soak through my jacket, feeling something in me start to dissolve. Not pain exactly, not peace either. Just the fragile knowing that maybe love doesn't return in the same shape it left. It changes. It quiets. It learns to exist, even when you're no longer waiting for it to. The rain outside had slowed to a whisper by the time I stepped back into the car. The window fogged with my breath, tracing faint halos over the town that had once been home. I sat there, hands on the steering wheel, not driving, just being. The cafe still glowed behind me, soft and warm, like a memory that didn't know it had already ended. The coffee I'd left untouched still lingered in my mind, its steam fading, its warmth gone, the imprint of my lips drying against the rim. That cup, it felt like a metaphor for everything we had become. Once warm, once full, now something you sip out of habit, not hunger. I thought about going back in, to say something, anything. But what could words do now? He had walked away with the same careful composure he'd arrived with. No anger, no affection, just distance, polished over years of practice. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel and whispered to no one. He came. That should be enough, but it didn't feel like enough. For 12 years I had imagined this moment as something different. A long embrace, tears, maybe even laughter through the ache. I'd pictured myself reaching out, my hands trembling as he forgave me for all the ways I had failed to stay. But life isn't a movie, and forgiveness doesn't always wait for the right dialogue. The truth was quieter. It came in half smiles and shallow breaths, in the way his eyes softened, but only for a second. In the way he said, "Take care," like someone wishing a stranger well. And yet, somewhere beneath that restraint, I saw something. A flicker, a pulse of memory, The kind that hides inside you long after you've convinced yourself it's gone. Maybe that's what love becomes when it's grown too old to be loud. Something that hums beneath the silence, waiting for no one's permission to exist. I finally started the car. The wipers brushed away the remnants of the storm, and the town unfolded before me like a place I almost remembered. I passed the old park where he learned to ride a bike. I could still see him wobbling down the path, his small hands gripping the handlebars, calling out, "Don't let go yet." And I hadn't, not really, even after he told me to. The years apart hadn't erased that moment. It had preserved it. Like a photograph you keep tucked away because you're afraid of what it might make you feel. As the car rolled through familiar streets, I realized how time had reshaped the landscape. New shops where old ones used to be, houses painted over, trees grown taller. Everything had changed. Everything but the ache. When I reached the edge of town, I pulled over again. The rain had started up once more, light, unsteady, as if unsure whether to stay or pass. I rolled down the window just enough to feel a few drops land on my hand. They were cold, like the coffee, like the silence between us, but they were real. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in years, I let myself say his name out loud. Not as a question, not as a plea, just as a memory. It filled the car softly, not echoing, just resting there, like something sacred. And then something inside me shifted. It wasn't joy, and it wasn't sorrow. It was acceptance. Fragile, trembling, but true. Maybe the reunion wasn't meant to heal what was broken. Maybe it was meant to remind me that love, even in its quietest form, had never truly left. It had just changed shape. It had become patience. It had become restraint. It had become that cold coffee sitting untouched. Proof that something once warm had existed long enough to cool. As I watched the rain slide down the windshield, I thought, perhaps some reunions aren't meant to bring people back together. Perhaps they're meant to teach us how to let go, gently, without bitterness. Because sometimes love's final act isn't holding on. It's knowing when the warmth has faded, and choosing to remember it anyway. The highway stretched out like an old scar, straight, silent, and endless. I drove without turning on the radio, letting the hum of the tires fill the silence that used to belong to laughter. The night pressed against the glass, soft and heavy, the kind of darkness that makes you see yourself in every reflection. I thought I'd feel lighter after seeing him. Instead, the weight just shifted, from waiting to remembering. Each passing mile felt like a rewind. The headlights carved tunnels through fog, and every flicker of light brought back something I had buried. His small hands clutching mine when he was afraid of thunder. The way he'd look over his shoulder to make sure I was still there. He doesn't look back anymore. And I can't blame him. There's a moment, somewhere between leaving and arriving, when you realize the past doesn't live where it used to. It follows quietly in the rearview mirror. It doesn't chase. It just lingers. I stopped once when at a gas station that hadn't changed in decades. The old neon signs still buzzed, half the bulbs gone, the rest flickering like tired memories. I got out just to breathe. The air smelled like wet asphalt and pine. Sharp, nostalgic, grounding. Inside the small shop, the same man still worked the counter. He didn't recognize me, but I recognized him. Time had softened his face, but not his kindness. "Long drive?" he asked. I nodded. "Heading home?" I hesitated before answering. Something like that. The words felt wrong even as I said them. Because home isn't always a place you can go back to. Sometimes it's just a season that ended before you realized it was over. I bought a bottle of water I didn't need, just to delay leaving. When I got back to the car, I noticed the passenger seat, empty, yet full of presence. That's the strange thing about love. It doesn't vanish when someone leaves. It settles into the spaces they once filled. The drive resumed. The road curved through fields that glimmered faintly under moonlight. I rolled down the window and let the night air in. It smelled like rain and soil, like forgiveness trying to find its way back into me. I thought about the years between us, 12 of them, stacked like unread letters. There were things I wanted to tell him, that I kept the car he helped me wash when he was 10, that I still make the pancakes too thick, the way he liked them, that I never stopped checking the mailbox, even when I knew nothing would come. But words are strange creatures. They never arrive on time. At a red light near the outskirts of town, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. The face staring back looked older, yes, but it also looked quieter, more honest. I realized I'd spent half my life trying to prepare for a moment that lasted less than an hour. And in doing so, I forgot how to simply be in it. Maybe that's what grief really is. The space between what we expected and what we got. The rain began again, soft as breath. I didn't hurry. I let it wash over the car, the rhythm steady and forgiving. For a brief moment, the headlights caught the outline of a tree by the road, the same kind I planted years ago in our backyard. Its branches swayed, soaked and glistening. I thought of him again. Not as the man who walked away, but as the boy who once ran barefoot through puddles, laughing like the world belonged to him, and for the first time in years, I smiled. Not from joy, but from remembering without ache. The drive home didn't end in arrival. It ended in understanding that some distances are meant to remain, not as punishment, but as proof that love once reached that far. When I finally turned into my driveway, the lights were off. The house waited in silence, walls holding the breath of memories too gentle to disturb. I sat there for a while, engine off, listening to the ticking of the cooling metal, a rhythm like a heartbeat easing into rest. Outside, the rain softened to a drizzle. Inside me, something loosened. Not completely, but enough. I whispered into the quiet, "I'm home." And though no one answered somehow, it felt like someone did. Morning came softly, as if afraid to wake me. The house was quiet again. Not the kind of quiet that soothes, but the kind that listens. Every sound, the drip of the faucet, the creak of the floor, carried its own memory. Even the light, through the curtains, felt like it was passing through years before it reached me. The cup from last night still sat on the counter. Cold coffee, untouched. I should have poured it out, but I couldn't. Somehow it felt wrong to erase even that, the evidence of having hoped. I walked through the rooms like a visitor, careful not to disturb anything. Each space felt smaller than I remembered, yet full in a different way. The air was dense with the ghosts of small things, the scent of his old shampoo, the faint scratch marks on the wall from when he'd raced his toy cars along the baseboards. It's strange how a home remembers what we try to forget. The silence no longer felt empty. It had learned me, memorized the way I breathed, the way I hesitated before saying his name aloud. It filled every pause I didn't know I was leaving. I sat by the window, the same window from the beginning, and watched the world continue without me. Somewhere out there, he was living a life that didn't need my voice to hold it together. That thought should have hurt more than it did. Instead, it just settled inside me, quiet and steady. Maybe this is what it means to grow older, not losing what we love, but learning how to live beside its absence. The rain had stopped, but the world still smelled of it. Soft earth, damp leaves, renewal I wasn't ready for. Across the yard, the swing still hung from the old tree. The ropes were frayed, the seat discolored, but it hadn't broken. It moved faintly in the wind, as if remembering. That swing had carried laughter once, his and mine, tangled together. I used to push him until he screamed for me to stop, then asked for one more push. That sound, his laughter, it used to fill the whole yard. Now, the echo was all that remained, a sound I heard in my chest more than my ears. I stood there, watching it sway. For the first time, I didn't cry. I just watched, letting the quiet do what words never could. Inside, on the shelf by the door, sat the photograph, the one I used to turn face down. Today, I picked it up. The colors had faded, his face smaller, his smile uncertain. I brushed the dust away and set it upright again. It didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. Maybe the heart only breaks once. After that, it just bends around the missing pieces. I realized I'd been waiting. Not for him to come back, but for something I couldn't name. Maybe forgiveness, maybe peace, or maybe just the courage to look backward without drowning. The light shifted through the window, soft, golden, forgiving. It landed on the watch lying on the table. I hadn't wound it in years, but somehow it had started ticking again. I don't remember when it happened. Maybe last night, when I came home. Maybe it never stopped, and I just couldn't hear it until now. I listened to it. Tick, pause, tick. The sound steady as breathing. It felt like time was finally exhaling, like the years between us had loosened their grip just enough to let me rest. There are moments you don't notice until they're gone. The smell of pancakes on Sunday mornings, the way sunlight used to spill across his bed, the simple sound of his footsteps down the hall. They fade slowly, replaced by quieter sounds, the hum of the refrigerator, the rustle of wind through half-closed curtains. That's how grief changes. It doesn't disappear. It just softens, until even silence feels like company. As evening fell, I stood outside again. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of wet grass. The swing moved once more, slow and gentle. I reached out and stopped it with my hand, not to hold it still, but to feel the weight of it. The world didn't pause. The sky didn't open. Nothing grand happened. But in that stillness, I understood something I hadn't before. That sometimes love returns not as a person, not as a word, but as the quiet that finally feels bearable. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't sound like punishment. It sounded like peace. The house smelled faintly of old wood and rain, a scent that carried both comfort and longing. I wandered through the rooms slowly, letting my fingers trace the edges of objects that had once been alive with him. A small chair tipped against the wall, a toy car forgotten beneath the sofa, the chipped mug he used to insist was his special one. Time had taken so much from us. Birthdays missed, conversations never had, moments that had slipped quietly into memory. And yet, what remained was vivid, stubborn, unyielding. Each object, each shadow, each fragment of a day long gone, was proof of what had been. I picked up the watch he had once worn, the one I had kept wound, hoping it might hold him close. Its face was scratched, the hands trembling slightly. I pressed it to my chest and listened. The ticking was faint, but steady, like a heartbeat that had never truly stopped. It occurred to me then that maybe time doesn't steal entirely. Maybe it reshapes. It removes, yes, but it also leaves behind the contours of love, the quiet echoes that remind us who we were and who we still are. I found the old photograph, the one I'd turned face down so many times. Now I held it upright, and for the first time, I could look at it without wincing. His small hand in mine, that unguarded smile, the innocence we had both lost along the way. It hurt to remember, yes, but it also warmed something inside me that had been frozen for too long. I sat by the window, letting the afternoon sun spill across the floor, and let the memories move through me. They were not sharp pangs of grief anymore, but gentle ripples of what had once been, small joys tucked between the ache of absence. There were letters, too, tucked away in a drawer. I pulled one out, yellowed with age, and read it slowly. It was unsigned, unfinished, a reflection of a heart caught somewhere between hope and fear. I realized then that much of love exists not in grand gestures or perfect words, but in the small, unfinished moments, the ones that stay behind when people move on. Time had taken him from me, yes, but it had left me something greater. the ability to see him clearly in memory, without the blur of guilt or regret clouding the view. I could remember him as he was, not as a reflection of what I had failed to give, but as a person who had grown beyond me, carrying the love I had left him in ways I could no longer touch. I walked through the old living room again. The swing in the backyard swayed faintly in the evening breeze, and I could almost hear him laughing as it carried him higher, toward the sky, toward freedom. The sound was fragile, almost imaginary, but it was enough. It reminded me that what was gone still mattered, and that absence did not erase presence. Sitting in that quiet, surrounded by the artifacts of a life shared and lost, I understood something profound. Love, when it is real, does not vanish simply because time intervenes. It changes form. It hides in small things. It rests in memories, in objects, in quiet moments when the heart remembers without asking for anything in return. I pressed the photograph and the watch together in my hands. The ache in my chest softened. The tears that came were not of sorrow, but of recognition. The recognition that what we had, however brief, had shaped both of us irrevocably. And as the day gave way to evening, as shadows stretched long across the floor, I allowed myself to feel it fully. The grief, the love, the silence, and the understanding that even in loss, there is a fragile, enduring grace. Time had taken so much, but what it had left behind was enough. The path to the old house was lined with trees that had grown taller than I remembered, their branches tangled like the years we had lost. The air smelled of damp earth and leaves, the faint trace of rain that had fallen hours ago. Each step forward felt heavier and lighter at the same time, heavy with the weight of memory, light with the fragile hope that some things, however changed, still remembered us. The house came into view, quiet and waiting, bathed in the soft glow of late afternoon. Its walls held the echoes of laughter, of bedtime stories, of small hands tracing patterns on windows fogged with breath. I paused at the gate, feeling the stillness press gently against me, like a familiar voice speaking without words. And then I saw it. The swing. Rusted at the chains, the seat faded and cracked, but still there. It moved faintly in the breeze, as though keeping vigil over the years it had witnessed. I approached slowly, the gravel crunching underfoot, and I felt the memory of him there. The squeals of joy, the pleas for one more push, the way he'd lean back and trust me to keep him safe. I reached out and touched the rope. Cold, frayed, unyielding, yet it held. And in that holding I felt a connection to everything that had been, to everything I had feared was lost. Some things break, yes. Some things fade. But some things endure quietly, patiently, holding space for us to find them again. If only we remember where to look. I wandered through the yard, noticing details I had long forgotten. The old tree we had planted together, its bark rough beneath my fingers. The garden patch we had tended, now overgrown, wild in its own way. The porch swing where he had once slept after long summer afternoons. Each object, each space, was a mirror reflecting not only the past, but the passage of time, the resilience of memory, and the quiet persistence of love. Inside the house, I traced the familiar contours of the rooms. The kitchen smelled faintly of old wood and something I couldn't name, a scent that belonged to us alone. The living room floor still held the faint indentation of tiny feet running across it, of games played and toys scattered. The photographs on the walls were new, but I could imagine the ones that had once hung there, capturing fleeting smiles, frozen moments that time couldn't touch. I sat on the edge of the old sofa, feeling the weight of the years settle around me. I thought of all the mornings I had missed, all the birthdays, all the small conversations that had gone unspoken. And yet, even amidst the ache, there was tenderness. A recognition that what had been was still alive in the echoes, in the spaces between the objects, in the rustling leaves outside. Standing by the window, I watched the swing sway gently. It was a simple motion, but it carried everything I could not hold in words. The laughter, the joy, the love, the absence, the longing, the hope. I realized then that healing does not always come in grand gestures or perfect moments. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the recognition that what has shaped us remains with us, even when we cannot reach back. I left the house as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in gentle shades of gold and pink. The swing moved one last time in the breeze, and I felt a small, deep peace settle in my chest. Love I understood had never left. It had only changed form, finding new ways to exist in memory, in objects, in quiet reflection. And for the first time, I walked away without feeling the need to hold on. Some things I realized do not return. Some things, thankfully, stay, quietly, enduringly, in the places that remember us. Weeks had passed since I visited the old house, and life had settled into its quiet rhythm again. The days were longer, the mornings slower, filled with the soft hum of routine. Yet, even in that calm, I found myself waiting, not impatiently, but with a gentle curiosity, as if the world might whisper something I had been too tense to hear before. Then it came. A simple message, brief and unadorned, blinking softly on my phone. No fanfare, no apology, no explanations. Just a few words, careful and unhurried. Hope you're well. Mom said you still keep the old car. I read it once, then again. My chest tightened, not with regret, but with recognition. In that small note, I heard something I hadn't expected to. A thread of care, quiet and steady, stretching across the years. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't a promise. It was acknowledgement, presence, in the form of words that didn't demand a response. I held my phone in my hand for a long while, feeling the pulse of time. 12 years, measured not in anger or loss, but in the small, fragile connection that remained. There's a kind of love that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It slips quietly into the spaces we've cleared for it, in gestures small enough to be overlooked, but heavy enough to matter. A text like this, short, careful, carried more than words. It carried memory. It carried understanding. It carried peace. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Writing back would have imposed expectation on something that felt perfectly complete as it was. Instead, I placed the phone down and closed my eyes, letting the rhythm of the watch I had wound so carefully tick on in the background. The sound was steady, patient, like love itself, forgiving, forgiving, forgiving. I thought of the photograph, of the swing, of the old house that had stood as a witness to everything. And I realized that the small gestures, the watch ticking, a message arriving, a tree still standing, were more than enough. They were proof that what we once shared had never truly disappeared. I walked to the window and watched the street below, quiet in the fading light. Somewhere out there, he lived a life apart from mine. And yet, in this tiny message, in the echoes of memories, there was a bridge, delicate, almost invisible, but real. Sometimes, love returns not with a bang, not with sweeping gestures, not with the words we think it must carry. Sometimes, it comes as a whisper in a quiet afternoon, as a note that doesn't demand a reply, as a presence that does not need recognition to be felt. I let the moment settle around me, a soft, persistent warmth. The years apart had shaped us, yes, but they had not broken us. They had only taught us how to find each other in small, enduring ways. I didn't feel the need to reach for the phone again. I didn't need to respond, to ask questions, or to fill in the gaps. The message had done its work simply by existing. Sometimes, the quietest things are the loudest proof of love. And in that silence, I finally breathed fully again. Evening settled slowly, like a sigh across the sky. The light softened, golden and forgiving, spilling through the window and across the familiar contours of the room. Shadows stretched long, gentle and calm, as if time itself had slowed to let me breathe. I stood by the window and watched the world outside, noticing details I had missed in the hurry of life. The way the wind moved through the trees, the subtle shimmer of leaves brushing against each other, the quiet rhythm of distant footsteps along the street. Each sound, each movement carried a story. Some I remembered, some I could only imagine. I thought of him, the son I had waited for all those years, the one whose laughter still lived in the rusted swing, in the chipped toys, in the photograph on the shelf. 12 years had passed, and everything had changed. And yet, in this quiet evening, I felt a strange completeness. Not everything had returned. Not everything had been forgiven. But love, in its soft, unspoken ways, had found its place. The watch ticked steadily on the table. Tick, pause, tick, a reminder that time moves forward, carrying both loss and healing. I picked it up, feeling the weight of it in my hand. The ticking seemed to echo something I had known all along, that life, like love, continues quietly, even when we think it has stopped. I remembered the swing in the backyard, swaying faintly in the wind. I remembered the photograph, the letters, the objects that had held the essence of what we shared. They had been my companions through years of longing, my witnesses to the love that had never fully left. And now, standing here in the fading light, I understood that peace is not found in grand reunions or perfect endings. It is found in the small moments, the steady ticking of a watch, the whisper of wind, the memory of laughter that lingers even when the voice is gone. I breathed in slowly, letting the quiet fill me. For the first time in years, I did not feel the ache of absence. Instead, I felt presence, the kind that does not shout, does not demand, does not vanish. Presence that endures, patient and gentle, like the light that lingers after the storm. After years apart, I finally saw my son, and though everything had changed, though the past could not be undone, I knew, somehow, that it was enough. Love had returned, not as it once was, but in a quieter, gentler form. A love that didn't need proof, that didn't ask for acknowledgement, that simply existed in the spaces between memory and the present. The sun dipped lower, casting the room in hues of gold and rose. I stood still, listening to the soft hum of life around me, feeling the steady pulse of the watch in my hand. Everything had changed, and yet somehow everything was right. Sometimes I thought, love doesn't come back the way we imagine. It comes back quietly, softly, in ways that teach us to breathe again, to remember without pain, to forgive without words. And as the light faded, leaving the world in gentle shadow, I felt the weight of years lift from my shoulders. The silence was no longer empty. It was home.